But first, let's go over to my first guest, Baroness Claire Fox, independent peer and director of the Academy of Ideas. Welcome, Claire.
Good morning, Kevin.
Well, first off, let's talk about what's going on in Washington, your take on it. I mean, it seems to me what we're witnessing now as the Eurogang scurry across the Atlantic to pay homage to the great president, that we're witnessing a kind of enshrinement of the new world order. You know, that Putin and Trump get together on Friday in Alaska, Trump effectively allowing Putin to come in from the cold with the red carpet treatment. They carve up this deal which will involve Ukraine having to give away great swathes of its territory. Now the Eurogang are flying over to Washington, whereby Trump will no doubt say, take my deal or it's no deal. And they will probably say, no, we've got to stand with Zelensky. We can't give away territory. But in the end, the European leaders look almost reduced to sort of impotent witnesses as the two big guys carve up, or at least attempt to carve up, a deal. Strange spectacle, I think.
Yeah, there's also something very disconcerting about the fact that the EU gang, or the Euro gang as you described them, are kind of accompanying Zelensky like he's like their child and they're like the chaperones. You know, there's something faintly paternalistic about that. I don't doubt that this is a complete shift in international geopolitics, and it's disconcerting largely because I think that sovereignty is hugely important, borders are hugely important, and we've just seen Putin ride roughshod over both in relation to Ukraine. And it seems to me that even though you can say, oh well, you know, we in the UK had it affect us, it means that we're basically prepared to sacrifice those borders and the notion of sovereignty if we throw Ukraine to the dogs. And the problem is that the EU and the Euro crowd and Starmer will say, we're not prepared to do that, but they won't necessarily step up. They haven't convinced their home populations of the importance of things like sovereignty and borders because they're not protecting their borders themselves, and they're rather embarrassed about the whole notion of national sovereignty, let's be honest. And in addition to that, if you look, the EU has spent more money on Russian oil because of its net zero position than it's done in helping Ukraine. I mean, talk about double standards. I mean, if it really wanted to do something, it would, first of all, have not gone down this green lunacy route that it means that it's dependent on Russian gas and oil, which therefore is subsidizing the war in the first place. And also they have for too long just thought they could use rhetoric in order to win this war and depend on America. And now that America's said, no, you've got to pay for it yourselves, they're rather looking impotent, it seems to me.
Yeah, extraordinary fact. I read this at the weekend. The biggest supplier of oil to Europe is India. India doesn't even really have any oil. The point being that India buys it cheaply from its big mate Russia, from Putin, sells it to Europe and then splits up the divvies with Moscow. So that's
the way it happens, but it's nonetheless it's Russian oil.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. So you're right. Europe continue to bolster Russia's economy by buying its oil, albeit via a circuitous route, but buying it left, right and centre on a constant basis. So yes, hypocrisy there. And let me ask you this. I've got to move on in a second because we're going to deal with this a little later as well, of course, Claire. But let me ask you this. You know, we get our politicians all across the board, particularly, of course, Labour or Starmer, but the Tories are the same, and obviously the Lib Dems and everything. There's this assumption that they stand and say, yes, we're four square, shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. We're going to keep giving it money. We're going to keep giving it weapons. We've got to carry on this fight to stop Russian aggression. You know, I understand the geopolitics, and I'm sure most people in Britain too. But when Keir Starmer, you know, assumes that all of Britain is well behind the fact that we have so far given Ukraine £18 billion since the war started, 18.3 billion if you want to be precise, and we have pledged to give them another 3 billion a year all the way until at least 2030. when Keir Starmer, presents this to us as if we're all going to go, absolutely, yes, you're going to carry on spending that money. Do you think that the majority of British people are right behind this?
Well, I've argued from the beginning that although I am actually, 110% behind Ukraine and think that this is a fight that we should all be involved in, as I say, because I think sovereignty and protecting borders from invasion are very important. I've also argued that one of the problems is that assumption that you're referring to. You can't assume that the British public agree with you. And it struck me, even though I'm on the side of Ukraine and want this to be what my fellow citizens agree with me on, that you can't assume that. In a democracy, what the government has not done is gone out and tried to win the argument with the British public about why this is right. I mean, you take the public for granted that way. Yeah. So we've dealt with it as though it's a kind of morally righteous position, even though I think it's the right position. And therefore it fits in with all these other political issues, which is it's a morally right position, no debate, you're with us, we're on the right side of history. Yeah. Well, actually, that's not the way it should work. Our politicians should have to justify to the citizens of the country that it's in what it's doing and why, not just kind of make these grand statements and assume everybody will agree with them. And basically, anyone who disagrees is then dismissed as a Putin apologist. Yeah. And that's a very dangerous situation to be in, because even though I think that Putin apologism is a real thing and I don't want in any way to concede to Putin, nonetheless, that's not something you can assume. You have to win those arguments with people, and they haven't bothered to do that.
You're exactly right, Claire. There is this assumption on the part of Starmer and many other politicians. You see them all, the Tories always standing in the interviews with their Ukraine badges on. They just assume that we're with them 100%. Now, I think most people in Britain, in fact, I'd say all people in Britain, of course they understand the geopolitics of this. They understand the importance of standing up to Ukraine. If you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. They understand that. But at the same time, they're struggling. We have a massive cost of living crisis. People are having trouble in our declining economy, and they look at the figures and they say, wait a second, this 18 billion quid you've already spent on Ukraine and the many billions more you're pledging to spend, we would prefer that you spent that on us. Now, that said, you're right, Claire. What the government needs to do, it needs to stop being quite so arrogant about their assumption that we're all foursquare behind everything they ever do for Ukraine, and to start talking to us, start explaining it, because otherwise I think there may be trouble ahead. The people won't just blindly follow this lot. So interesting times. Well, let's quickly move on if we can, Claire. Migrant hotel protest, very big one yesterday, last night outside the Britannia Hotel, Britannia International Hotel in Canary Wharf, where feelings are rising rather high. A migrant last week was arrested and has been charged with assault after allegedly marching into an old 80-year-old blind lady's house uninvited. So a lot of trouble going on there. Even the leader of the Tories in London, Susan Hall, joined the protest. Yeah, but the protests, I think, which are unfolding outside more and more of these hotels, and are getting more and more passionate, shall we say. They've been peaceful so far, largely peaceful. But Robert Jenrick, the shadow Justice Secretary, he says that they are proving that the continuing occurrence of these escalating hotel protests prove that in terms of this, in terms of the migrant crisis, 2,500 since last Wednesday, by the way, have come across the channel, and in terms of more and more asylum seeker hotels becoming trouble spots, more and more migrants being charged with serious offences, Robert Jenrick says that the British public have snapped, that they've had enough. Do you think we are at some sort of breaking point here?
I think there is a tipping point. First of all, I want to give some credit to the pink ladies who have been part of the focus of the demonstrations at Canary Wharf, because they've kind of given some expression in the most, jolly way, and the fact that they sing songs and all the rest of it, that these are organic local protests. People have had enough, but they've done everything they can to indicate this is not kind of like some violent mob rule. They've wanted to make it very clear, I think, the protesters, that this isn't the same as some of the civil unrest and riots that we saw last summer. So that's very important. But I do think there's underneath it all is an absolute fury that no matter what happens, nobody seems to listen. And I think the Labour government don't understand it or get it either, because they think that somehow if you move people out of the hotels, and that is a focus of local concern for the reasons that you've indicated, this largely undocumented young men hanging around and the potential threat that they pose and some real serious allegations made. But it's not just that. I mean, there's also the problem that if they move them from the hotels and they move them, for example, into houses of multiple occupancy, which we're beginning to see now in a number of towns around the UK, where people are just being moved into local areas out of hotels, that doesn't tackle the problem. You can kind of shift your problem round, but the prior problem is that they haven't got on top of controlling the borders. They haven't really got a solution, and they're one in, one out. You've already referred to what a joke that's become. Yeah. Their smash the gang slogan remains at the level of a slogan, and the actual serious job of tackling this actually a national crisis is now something that they need to take on board, which it seems unlikely they're going to. The other issue in terms of the protests, of course, just quickly, is the policing. Undoubtedly, the police are trying to tackle or handle this in a variety of ways, but I think we could see at Canary Wharf that they might well be in a situation where they're exacerbating the problem. They're issuing these Section 14 warnings, stand on the pavement only. There was a ridiculous encounter with a lady on a motor, on one of those Motability scooters, and they wouldn't, let her stay where she was. She had to move with the protesters because she had pink on, and they just come over as ludicrous, right? And incapable of policing the situation. And of course, the problem is there's so many police there that actually can sometimes exacerbate the tensions in the local area.
Yeah, one of the things worrying me about them, I mean, they've been going on pretty solidly now for about 4 weeks, these protests. And, here's to the crowds, here's to the pink ladies, here's to all the protesters. They have been peaceful. I mean, they've been quite passionate sometimes, but they've pretty much been peaceful. And what worries me about that is the peaceful nature of these protests appears to have offered or delivered to Keir Starmer the opportunity to not, and this is the truth, ever since they started 4 weeks ago, to not say a single word about them. He has not said a single word about these hotel protests, largely because they're peaceful and therefore they're not making massive licks in the paper. Therefore, he doesn't feel it's imperative that he makes a comment. But, his silence on this issue is typical of the man, isn't it? Absolutely.
I mean, by the way, they might not be saying anything publicly, but I can tell you they'll be obsessed about it behind the scenes.
Yes, let's hope so.
They know only too well this is a situation that they're losing control of. The danger is, of course, the temptation could then be, in order to get Keir Starmer to comment, we'll up the ante, and some of the more lively elements on the protest movement might try and make the headlines, which actually would be entirely unhelpful. Although I think next Sunday there's going to be much bigger protests all around the country, but it's also the case that we need to make it clear that these are local organic protests. Now, just in terms of Keir Starmer, I mean, I don't think the Tories can save their reputation in relation to, whatever they do, generate going down to Canary Wharf or Susan Hall or what have you. But when Kemi Badenoch went to Epping and sort of met some of the mothers there in relation to the hotel, I thought it was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely disdainful contempt that means that Labour haven't gone down there.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I just cannot get over it. Now, it's not as though they'd be welcome. I mean, it's obviously the case that if Keir Starmer turned up outside the protest, people would be like shouting at him. Yeah. But the job of being a leader of a country that is feeling the pain and anger and frustration around illegal migration and the small boats crisis is that you express some empathy, that you actually go down and talk to people You know, where is Jess Phillips, right?
Yeah.
This is
where are
often
any of them? Where are any of them?
Exactly, but Jess Phillips is very worried. You know, her job is to think about violence against women and girls. That's what her job is, right?
Yeah.
And in some instances, these have been examples of where young women have apparently been sexually assaulted. So at the very least, she could pop along, right, and have a chat.
Well, she could do. So could Keir. The thing is, they've clearly got a policy, Labour, the Labour government, to keep stum about this. If you don't mention it, hopefully it'll go away. And as you say, that's disdainful and patronising and wrong for a government. Claire, I've got to move on, but thank you for a brilliant start to the show. That's Baroness Claire Fox, independent peer and director of the Academy of Ideas.